A weapon that gleams with secrets and blood. Welcome to Fog Casebook. I am your host, Valor. Drop a comment and share where you're tuning in from. Your insight sharpens every case we solve. It was in the late autumn of '89, when the London fog lay so thick upon the streets that cabs moved like cautious beetles through a world upholstered in grey, that a crime of such singular character occurred as to engage the full measure of my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes's faculties. I had been absent at my practice in Kensington for a succession of long days, and had returned to Baker Street that evening fatigued, to find Holmes stretched at ease upon the settee, his long spare frame folded like a compass, his keen eyes half-lidded yet alight with that inward fire I had learned to associate with the scent of an approaching problem. Before I could make my greeting, Mrs. Hudson thrust open the door with the Times, damp and smelling of printer's ink. "Another one for you, Mr. Holmes," she observed with the tolerant resignation of a woman who has reconciled herself to thunderbolts. Holmes accepted the paper with a languid hand and flicked it open in a manner that missed nothing. His nostrils, so finely cut, gave the faintest quiver. "Watson," said he, without taking his gaze from the columns, "do you recall the Beauchamp collection? Those curious oriental spoils the old baronet sent home from his Levantine wanderings. Sir Roderick Beauchamp of Hanover Square, the same who endowed the surgical ward at St. Bartholomew's?" I asked, moving nearer. "I had not heard of him these 5 years. You shall hear of him now." Holmes read aloud in that dry, level tone he adopted when the facts were more extravagant than any embellishment. "Mysterious death in Mayfair. Sir Roderick Beauchamp, K.C.B., discovered in his private library shortly after midnight. A wound to the region of the heart. Room locked upon the inside. Weapon recovered, an Eastern ceremonial dagger of solid silver, removed from its display case. Scotland Yard engaged. No arrests." He lowered the paper. "Add, if you please, the Gazette's supplementary. The peculiar softness of the metal raises questions." "The softness?" I echoed. "Pure silver, my dear fellow, is a noble metal but an ill choice for honest murder. It bends, it does not pierce the rib, still less the sternum. And yet our baronet, so the press hints, has been stabbed through the heart. Do you not perceive the paradox? I confess that, though accustomed to Holmes's swift flights, a thrill passed through me. But if the blade cannot have made the wound, then why is it blooded?" Holmes's finger, so bird-like, so precise, indicated a smudged woodcut of the dagger beside the column, a narrow leaf-shaped blade, its hilt chased with vines and pomegranates, the pommel a small lion's head. The caption proclaimed it silver of Persian workmanship, 17th century. I had seen in my years of medical practice and in our adventures no paucity of the curious and vile. Yet there was in this matter a note both macabre and theatrical. A locked room, a gentleman of consequence slain among his curios, a weapon unsuited to its terrible office, and yet, if one believed the ink, stained with its victim's life. Holmes had risen and gone to the mantelpiece, where the meerschaum lay among a regiment of pipes. He selected the cherry wood and, with absent nicety, filled and lit it. "There is more," he murmured, scanning the column afresh. The servants heard a crash of glass at the stroke of 12 and, on breaking down the door with the assistance of a constable from the corner, found Sir Roderick upon the Turkey rug, a hand outflung toward the hearth. The window and the inner shutters were both latched, the chimney grate too narrow for a child. Upon the desk a decanter of port, 2 glasses, one used, one not, and, this is better, a smear of dark ash across the sill, though no one could say how it came there when the window was fastened. 2 glasses, I repeated. He had company, or wished someone to think so. Holmes's eyes left the newsprint and fixed upon a point in the air as though the solution hovered there and might be caught with a net. To observe the orchestration. A relic removed from its case, a dead gentleman, a room contrived to give no entrance. If this were a stage, we should applaud the scene painter and distrust the script. "It is devilish," I said, "for I am, I fear, more apt to speak my mind than my friend." "But Lestrade, will he not—" At that instant came the sharp rattle of the bell, followed by impatient steps, and a voice in the passage that carried the confident distress of those whose rank has grown accustomed to entry. Our door opened upon a lady of striking figure, though the early frost of her hair suggested an age nearer 60. Her countenance, pale save for 2 burning flags in her cheeks, had the imperious curve of long habit in command. She held herself as some Roman matron might, and her dark eyes, though reddened by recent weeping, were clear and steady. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" she demanded. Holmes inclined his head with that peculiar mixture of courtesy and detachment which so often soothed the hysterical and pricked the vain. "Pray be seated. Dr. Watson you may trust as you would myself." "I am Lady Eugenia Beauchamp," she said, taking the chair he indicated but refusing its support with a spine that would not bend. "My husband is dead. Scotland Yard Inspector Lestrade talks of thieves, of an intruder who coveted the gewgaws in my late husband's cases. Thieves do not select a silver toy to make a murder." Her hands clenched upon her reticule until the leather creaked. "They do not lock a door upon themselves and vanish in smoke. Sometimes, Lady Beauchamp," said Holmes, "they do precisely what no one expects, and sometimes what is presented as impossible is merely improbable, and what is improbable is the only truth consistent with all the facts. Tell me, were you at home?" "In my rooms above," she said. "I heard the crash. My nephew, Mr. Julian Armitage, had gone out earlier to his club. Our butler, Purcell, and the footman, Dean, were below stairs. We summoned the constable and broke the door. Roderick—" Her voice caught, but she mastered it. He lay upon his side. "The dagger, oh, that dreadful thing," was on the floor a little way off. The case where it had rested was shattered. The desk was in order. The fire had burned down. The windows, yes, the windows were fast. But there was an odor, madam. A faint sweetness like roses, but not roses. Purcell noticed it as well, and on the hearthrug a dark thread, as from a coarse weave. Lestrade has taken it away and says it is of no consequence. Holmes's attention, which had from the first been fixed, sharpened to a spear point. "You have done well to come to me," he said. "Your husband was a collector?" "From Damascus, from Smyrna, from the bazaars of Cairo," she replied. "Steel and silver, rugs and carven boxes. He loved their histories more than he loved—" She checked herself with a stiffness that told a history of its own. "More than he loved rest. And enemies? No more than any man of means," she said. "Petty suits about a boundary in Kent. A disagreement with a dealer in the Burlington Arcade, who accused my husband of passing him a counterfeit coin. Trifles. Roderick could be exacting. He did not always scruple to win his advantages." Holmes replaced his pipe upon the mantel and took up his violin bow, running a thumb along its horsehair as though to test an invisible tension. "Lady Beauchamp, I shall view your late husband's library before Lestrade's men rearrange it beyond recall. Pray command your carriage. Watson, your hat. I am curious to make the acquaintance of a dagger that defies both metallurgy and common sense." Within 20 minutes we were jolting through the damp vales of Baker Street toward the broad quiet of Hanover Square. The lamps threw islands of light upon the pavements, where the fog curled in ghostly wreaths about the ankles of the few pedestrians. Lady Beauchamp, opposite us, sat in marble composure, the only movement the tremor of a finger against her glove. Holmes, for his part, watched the condensation bead and race upon the carriage pane with that preoccupied air which to the uninitiated suggests abstraction, but which I had come to recognize as the most intense concentration. The Beauchamp house, a sober edifice of brick with ironwork whose severity spoke of an earlier Georgian taste. The E.C. Footman Dean admitted us with a face at once respectful and discomposed. The hall smelled faintly of beeswax and that other sweetness the lady had described, as if a sachet had burst some days before. We passed beneath the glimmering gaze of oil portraits into a corridor hung with Persian spears and shields. to a door upon which the splintered wood and bruised panels told the tale of recent violence. The library. "Sir?" Dean murmured. Holmes paused upon the threshold, his nostrils dilating. "Watson," he said very softly, "do you perceive it?" The fragrance, yes. Rose, no, something like rose, but heavier, a tar of damask. "They're adulterated," Holmes returned and stepped within. It was a handsome room, though now disordered by official curiosity. Glass glinted on the carpet from a shattered display. A turkey rug, splendid with reds and indigos, bore a dark stain at one corner where the baronet had fallen. The desk, severe and English, stood with its blotter squared, its pens laid in a line that must have pleased a military eye. Upon the mantel the clock had stopped at 12 minutes past the hour, though whether the violence had stilled it, or the clock itself had been ailing, I could not yet say. The inner shutters were latched, the brass bright where fingers had lately touched. Holmes knelt by the rug, not touching, only looking. I saw his gaze travel from the stain to the hearth, thence to the sill where a smear of grey lay dull against the polished wood. His eye moved again to a fallen thread snagged upon a nail's rough burr, and then to a curious dulled sheen upon the smashed display case's velvet, as if something had passed over it recently that left a track invisible to all but him. He straightened. "A locked room," he murmured. "A silver dagger. A clock that dies at 12 after. An ascent which has no business here." He turned those grey eyes upon me, and I confess I felt the old excitement kindle. "We have, I think, a play within a play, Watson. Let us hope the author is as competent in his denouement as in his overture." Holmes's first movement in the library was as noiseless and exact as the fall of a chessman upon its destined square. He asked that the lamps be lowered to their middle height, for glare, he said, is the enemy of form, and form the ally of truth. A Lady Beauchamp withdrew to the door and held herself there as sentinel, while the footman hovered, with the anxious conscientiousness of a man who fears to be suspected merely for being present. Lestrade had not yet returned from a promised consultation with the surgeon, and thus we had the advantage of an uncluttered field. Holmes crouched at the smashed display case and extended his hand flat over its velvet lining, not touching but feeling, as it were, for movement in the air. "Dust disturbed in a narrow band," he murmured. "Not the broad scatter of a blow alone. You perceive, Watson, the dulled strip here and here, no more than 2 inches wide, leading from the vacant recess where the dagger lay to the lip of the case. What instrument passes thus grazing velvet in a narrow course? Not a human hand. A cord, I ventured. Possibly. The question is, drawn by whom and from where? His glance travelled to the window and its glossy latch. He did not open it. He examined instead the sill where the grey smear lay, a drag, not a dot with the faintest gritty sparkle. From his pocket he produced the little lens I had seen him purchase only that week in Tottenham Court Road, and bent, the line of his back as still as if engraved. "Ash," he said at length, "but not of tobacco. Powdered charcoal mingled with, yes, a faint lustre, mica or talc, the sort of residue one sees upon cheaply perfumed pastilles from the Levant. They used charcoal dust as a base. The scent," I exclaimed. "Then some pastille was burned here, or carried and broken," he returned. "Note also the edge of the sash," he indicated, with the bow of his violin which he had brought under his coat, like a surgeon's favourite instrument, a shallow scratch in the hard paint along the lower frame, an inch long, very fresh. That is not the patina of years, but the signature of recent friction. We will not disturb it yet." He moved next to the hearth where the cinders lay in a neat bed, the grate having been scoured earlier in the evening. He took snuff from his silver box, not for use, for he abhors it, but to flick the smallest pinch upon the rug, and watched how the grains lodged. Satisfied, he pointed with a long finger to the dark thread Lady Beauchamp had earlier described. It was shorter than I had supposed, a mere tuft of coarse fibre, dark blue turning almost black when pressed. Holmes rolled it on his palm. "A warp thread from a heavy serge," he said. "Machine-spun, inexpensive, but dense. A sailor's pea-jacket might provide such stuff." So too the common overcoat of the cheaper London tailoring houses. We shall not jump to seas when there are streets nearer at hand. He rose and turned to the desk. The decanter of port, squat and ruby in the lamplight, had two companions of thin-stemmed crystal, one with a shallow tide mark, the other pristine. Holmes sniffed the used glass as a hound might test a trail, then added a single drip from the decanter to the unused one. He set the two side by side and peered through them against the lamp. "You see the faint film about the interior of the first?" he asked me. "I see that it looks clouded." "Precisely. Old port leaves a bloom, but this is not bloom. It is a residue of some powdered substance insufficiently dissolved. A grain adheres even now to the lip. I shall not taste it." He took out a paper knife from the desk, dislodged the granule, and let it fall upon his cuff, where it sparkled minutely. Mica again and charcoal. The same adulteration, then, as we observed upon the sill. The odor in the room is no figment. It has a carrier. He lifted the clock from the mantel and weighed it in his hands. "Stopped at 12 minutes past 12, he said. A cheap French movement which, if shaken, stops readily. Did it halt with the breaking in of the door or earlier?" He held the case near his cheek, listening. "Run down?" "No. The spring retains power." "Then it was ajar." Perhaps the crash of glass which the servants heard at the hour sufficed. Our chronology remains orthodox. Crash at midnight. Door burst. Discovery at once. Lady Beauchamp had watched all this with a stoicism that bordered on disdain for any faculty less acute than Holmes's. "Mr. Holmes," she said, "you observe much, but it was murder and my husband is dead. Will you observe the murderer also?" "I hope rather to observe the murderer first, and then demonstrate him to you," Holmes answered with that cool assurance which would be insufferable in any but the man who could justify it. "Before that I require certain small data. May I see the case from which the dagger was taken?" Dean indicated it with a trembling hand. It was of oak with a glass front, now a cobweb of cracks and fallen shards. Within lay empty moulds where other pieces had reposed. A pair of yataghans with their jewelled scabbards, a small kriss of waved steel and, conspicuously void, the central bed shaped for a leaf-bladed knife. On the backboard, faint though legible, were penciled notations in a neat, precise hand. "Sir Roderick's inventory," Holmes observed. He used pencil to avoid marring the wood. "Very exact." He spelled out number 7, dagger. "Silver, Persian. Lion pommel. Not to be handled." He tapped the last words. "Why not, Lady Beauchamp?" She hesitated. My husband was proud of his acquisitions, but he had lately become fastidious about this one. He said the metal bruised easily, that even one careless touch would mark it. "A plausible reason," said Holmes, "or a pretext." "Did he lock this case?" "Always." "And who held the key?" "Roderick and Purcell, our butler." "Then I must speak with Purcell." Dean vanished and returned with a man whose reliability seemed built into his very bones. Purcell was of medium height, iron-grey with the untroubled gaze of one who has conducted many storms beneath a polished calm. He bowed to Lady Beauchamp, then to Holmes and to me. Holmes questioned him with the gentle relentlessness of a fine rain. At what hour had Sir Roderick retired to his library? Shortly after 10. Had he expected a guest? None was announced. No ring had sounded at the bell. Had the family been at home? Her ladyship above, Mr. Armitage out, the servants in the hall below until the noise. Did Sir Roderick frequently drink alone at night? A single glass was his custom. Had any parcels arrived that day? A small packet from Mr. Constantine, the dealer in the arcade, brought by boy. Sir Roderick received it himself. What became of the paper wrappings? They were burned in the kitchen fire. And the key to this case? Holmes asked. Purcell produced from his waistcoat a small ring to which 2 flat keys were attached. "One is mine, sir." The other was Sir Roderick's. At night I returned mine to the pantry safe. Sir Roderick kept his. Missing now? I believe so. It is not with his effects. Holmes nodded. Very good. One other matter. Do any among you, yourself, Dean, the maids, use scent or pastilles of Eastern fashion? Purcell's brows rose. No, sir. I cannot abide sickly smells. Mrs. Hudson, if I may say, keeps a better house than any perfumery. Just so. Holmes's gaze, having impaled the facts like butterflies, pinned also Dean. And you, Dean? You were nearest the door when it was forced. Yes, sir. The constable and I shouldered it together. It gave all at once and knocked me near over. Your coat, might I see the sleeve? The footman, startled, extended an arm. Holmes, with a delicate touch, plucked at a rough seam near the cuff. Not you, then, he murmured, as if to himself, and released the lad, who looked at me with a relief that would have been comic in any other room. We turned, at last, to the body itself. Lestrade, arriving in a flurry and apologizing for delay, joined us as Holmes uncovered the sheet and kneeled. Sir Roderick's face had that peacefulness which sometimes reproaches the living. Yet the clothing, dinner coat, fine shirt, was rucked by the fall, and at the breast there was a dark, decisive wound. Straight between the ribs, I said, for my training returned in such moments, and spoke before my prudence. A clean thrust, with a silver blade. Lestrade's incredulity broke through his habitual dryness. We have the thing, there it lies, and the old gentleman dead within 3 feet of it. The room locked. What more do you call for, Mr. Holmes? Only coherence, Holmes replied. He indicated the lips of the wound. Watson? I examined. There is bruising at the margins, but not the sort one sees with soft metal. This is the contusion of something rigid. And yes, there is a faint dark smear along the edge of the cutaneous tear. Charcoal, Holmes said. The same that smudges the sill and clouds the glass. Our murderer writes one word over and over, and we shall learn to read his hand. He stood, and in the same motion plucked the silver dagger from the floor, wrapped it in his handkerchief, and pressed its point against the oak sill with a measured force. The blade bent like willow, and when released, retained the merest whimper of a curve. You observe, he said softly, that this could not pierce sternum or rib without leaving its own confession. Yet the wound is honest steel's work. He set the weapon down with the reverence one gives to a prop discovered behind the scenes. Then what in heaven's name made the hole? Lestrade demanded. Holmes's eyes had strayed to the stopped clock, then to the sash scratch, then to the narrow, dulled track across the velvet. He smiled, and I saw the gleam which meant that he had scented, if not run down, his quarry. Not heaven, Inspector, he said. Something altogether nearer to earth and to habit. He turned to Lady Beauchamp. With your leave, madam, I must speak next with your nephew, and with Mr. Constantine of the Arcade. Meanwhile, pray permit no servant to air this room, to sweep it, or to remove a single fragment. The drama is delicate. A breath may change its ending. Holmes remained for some moments motionless, his hand upon the mantelpiece and his gaze fixed, not upon the lifeless figure on the rug, but upon some private map of conjectures charted only in his mind. Lestrade shifted impatiently, as if the silence pressed upon him like a weight. Lady Beauchamp's proud composure had softened into the first tremors of weariness, and she excused herself with a bow, leaving us in company of the inspector, the servants, and that unnerving stillness which falls upon a house where death lingers close by. Watson, Holmes said at length, we must secure 2 threads before they vanish. One lies with the nephew, Mr. Julian Armitage, the other with Mr. Constantine, the dealer. Lestrade, may I trust that you will detain both gentlemen from flight until I have spoken with them? They're not my prisoners, Lestrade retorted, but I'll see Armitage when he comes in, and I can send a man for Constantine. Still, I don't see why you won't take the dagger for what it is. It was found here, and the old man's heart pierced. That's good enough for any jury, Holmes smiled faintly. A jury of which you are the foreman, Inspector, would need no further evidence. But until silver learns the qualities of tempered steel, we must look beyond appearances. Holmes turned then to Purcell. If Mr. Armitage should return, you will request him to wait upon me in the morning at Baker Street. Watson, I think our inquiries will profit by daylight and fresh minds. We quitted the house with the fog clinging closer about us than before, as though London itself had drawn a curtain across the tragedy. The hansom rattled us home. Holmes sunk in meditation, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin. I longed to question him, but I had learnt that his silence was the forge in which hypotheses were tempered, and so I sat in companionable patience until, at last, he spoke. "You remarked, Watson, upon the bruising of the wound." "You did not exaggerate. That injury was inflicted with force, but the weapon was not the dagger that lies so theatrically upon the floor. Consider also the port, the untouched glass, the powder clinging to the rim. Sir Roderick's death is no crime of passion. It is arranged with care, almost artistry, and yet it overreaches itself. In what manner?" Holmes leaned back. Had the assassin chosen a more plausible weapon, Scotland Yard might have contented itself with a prosaic tale of burglary. Instead, we are given a silver blade, a locked room, and a scent of Eastern perfume. It is too dramatic by half. When a story is too neatly composed, Watson, one should always suspect the stage manager. We reached Baker Street, and Holmes, with a vigour that belied the late hour, set about his small chemical experiments, placing the granule scraped from the glass into various reagents. The substance fizzed and left a blackish residue with a glint of mica. "As I thought," he said. "An adulterated incense powder. Common enough in the Levantine markets, cheap, coarse, and utterly out of place in a Mayfair library." I retired that night with my head full of conflicting impressions. The locked door, the shattered glass case, the bloody dagger incapable of killing, the powder and perfume that clung to every corner of the room. When I joined Holmes at breakfast, he was already dressed, his eyes bright with that nervous energy which signalled that the chase had begun. "Armitage will call shortly," he informed me. "I have also sent a note to Constantine. We shall hear his explanation of the packet he dispatched. The threads are tightening." It was not long before the young man appeared. Julian Armitage entered with a manner that struck me at once as a mixture of bravado and unease. He was tall, well-favoured, and bore the fashionable air of the younger set, who spent their nights in St. James's clubs and their days in languid recovery. His eyes, however, were restless, and his fingers tapped upon his hat-brim as he greeted Holmes. "My condolences, sir," Holmes began gravely. "I will spare you needless repetition of last night's events. I require only a few particulars. At what hour did you leave the house?" "Before 10, said Armitage. "I dined at the club and remained there until I heard of my uncle's death. I came home at once. You dined and played billiards, perhaps? Cards?" "Yes, certainly. Several gentlemen can vouch for me." Holmes inclined his head. "Did you observe anything unusual in your uncle's manner of late?" Armitage hesitated. "He was secretive." He had quarrelled with Constantine, the dealer. "Something about a false provenance, I believe. And he was forever fussing over that dagger, keeping it locked, forbidding us even to look at it. He said it was delicate, but I think, well, he had grown almost afraid of it." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Afraid, you say?" "Of the weapon itself?" "Yes. He would sometimes check the case in the middle of the night, as though to reassure himself. I thought it a whim. My uncle had many whims." Holmes dismissed him with a courteous bow, though I could see that he had stored away each syllable. When Armitage had gone, Holmes remarked, "A young man of quick nerves. His alibi may stand, yet his knowledge of the dagger's peculiar place in Sir Roderick's mind is most enlightening." By midday, Constantine presented himself at Baker Street. He was a lean, olive-skinned fellow, his black beard carefully pointed, his hands adorned with rings that glittered as he gesticulated. He greeted us with excessive courtesy, yet there was a nervous twitch at the corner of his mouth. "You supplied Sir Roderick with many curios," Holmes said, offering him no seat. "Yesterday a parcel was delivered. What did it contain?" "A small bronze amulet," Constantine replied at once. "A trifle from Smyrna. He had ordered it months ago, and nothing else." "Nothing, I swear it," Holmes took a sudden step forward. You were heard to quarrel with him over a counterfeit coin. Did you send perhaps incense as a peace offering? Or a powder to refresh his Eastern memories? Constantine's eyes flashed. No, sir. I sent nothing but the amulet. If incense was found, it was not of my hand. Holmes regarded him with that cold, searching scrutiny which few men could endure. Constantine's confidence faltered. His fingers tightened upon the brim of his hat until the knuckles whitened. At last Holmes turned away. That will suffice. You may go. But remember, truth is a plant that grows in the light, and I shall cast the shutters wide if need be. When he had gone, I exclaimed, Holmes, surely he lies. Perhaps, said Holmes, but lies, Watson, are like smoke. They drift to reveal the fire beneath. Constantine's denial is as useful to us as his confession. For now we have three strands: the nephew who speaks of fear, the dealer who dissembles, and the dagger which was not in fact the instrument of death. Each points to the same conclusion, though I will not yet speak it. He rang for his boots and cloak, his eyes gleaming. Come, Watson. We must return to Hanover Square. There is one test I have yet to make, and it may show us how a silver dagger could be found bloodied beside a man who was not killed by it. The true play, my dear fellow, is only beginning. When we returned that afternoon to Hanover Square, the fog had thickened so that the gas lamps burned as pale globes in a grey sea. The constable at the door admitted us with a respectful nod, and we found the library just as Holmes had requested, untouched, closed, the air heavy with that strange perfume that seemed at once floral and chemical. Lestrade awaited us, his expression betraying a man caught between irritation and reluctant curiosity. He had already scribbled notes upon his pocketbook, but made no move to impede Holmes's work, for experience had taught him that resistance only delayed the inevitable. Holmes moved without hesitation to the desk, where the two glasses still stood. He examined them once more, his gaze then falling upon the blotter and pens arranged in rigid precision. He took up the blotter and held it against the light. A faint impression of words emerged, no more than a line, but clear enough for one trained in such scrutiny. Holmes read aloud, "Dagger must not—" The rest trailed into nothing. Sir Roderick was interrupted, he murmured. The man had begun to write some note or reminder, but the pen was stilled. What is the meaning of must not? Must not what? Be touched? Be given away? Or must not remain? His lips curved into that tight smile which always foretold some revelation. Watson, observe how the ink is scarcely dried, the fibres hardly raised. He wrote this close upon the moment of his death. Holmes now turned to the window. With a flick of his lens, he re-examined the scratch upon the sash. He drew from his pocket a length of twine and held it taut against the mark. The cord fit perfectly. Then, stooping, he measured the distance from the sill to the broken display case. As I suspected, he said, a cord passed through this aperture, affixed to the dagger and drawn outward with steady hand. The weapon was dragged from its case, snapping the glass, then released to fall beside the victim. A clever contrivance, yet it answers only how the dagger moved, not how the man died. Lestrade scoffed. You're telling me, Mr. Holmes, that some villain stood outside that locked window in the middle of Mayfair, in fog thick as gruel, and hauled a dagger through the air like a puppet? Why, the window was fastened when we came in. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Precisely. Fastened afterwards. Remember, Inspector, the butler himself said the windows were shut tight when the door was forced. But who is to say they were not first unlatched and then quietly drawn to? The smear of ash upon the sill, the scratch, the scent, it all speaks of manipulation from without. I could not help interjecting. But Holmes, you admit the dagger cannot have been the fatal weapon. Why then go to such pains to make it seem so? Because, Watson, the true instrument is absent. Our murderer substitutes the silver blade to divert inquiry, to entangle us in impossibilities. He counts on Lestrade and his fellows to see the dagger, see the wound and conclude cause and effect. A false cause, but convenient. He turned then to the hearthrug where the stain of blood remained dark upon the pattern. Kneeling, he studied the shape of it with the same intensity he might give a chessboard. Note, Watson, how little blood there is for a wound of the heart. It suggests that death was instantaneous, the circulation stilled at once, yet the lips of the wound were bruised, the cut clean. A strong thrust with steel, but where is the steel? He rose, brushing his knees. We must seek it. Holmes began a meticulous survey of the room. He opened cabinets, shifted rugs, examined every recess. At last he paused near the bookcase, his hand upon a volume of travel memoirs. He drew it forth, and with it something clattered upon the shelf behind. A narrow, triangular blade, plain and utilitarian, its hilt wrapped in coarse cloth. It was smeared with a dull, rust-dark stain. There, Watson, he said softly, is our assassin's true friend, a blade of tempered steel, sharp and strong enough to pierce the breast. Concealed behind books, hidden in haste. That, not the silver dagger, drank Sir Roderick's life. Lestrade stared. Then why leave the silver one at all? Holmes replaced the travelogue. Because the dagger was part of the tale our murderer wished us to believe. It was a relic, long locked and admired, and therefore the perfect decoy. When the crime was discovered, all eyes would fall upon it. The real weapon, plain and ugly, could be overlooked, provided the room was not examined too closely. Fortunately for us, close examination is our custom. As he spoke, footsteps sounded in the hall, and Julian Armitage entered, his face pale and drawn. He started at sight of the bloodstain and the sheet-draped form. "I did not expect," he stammered, then steadied himself. "What more is to be done, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes regarded him with an unreadable calm. "More than you suppose, sir. Tell me, did your uncle ever speak of fearing theft?" Armitage hesitated. "Yes. He said more than once that someone coveted the dagger, that it might be stolen for its silver or its rarity." "Indeed. And did he ever allude to who that someone might be?" "No, only that he could not trust even those near him. He grew suspicious of servants, of dealers, of everyone." Holmes's gaze flicked briefly to Purcell, who had entered behind Armitage and now stood with his customary reserve. "Trust, once broken, is a delicate matter," Holmes said. "Did Sir Roderick mention the dealer Constantine?" Armitage's lips compressed. "Yes, he despised him. He said Constantine had once tried to foist a forgery upon him. Yet he still bought from him. I never understood why." Holmes turned aside and whispered to me, "Compulsion, Watson. When a collector becomes enslaved to his passion, he will even stoop to those he distrusts. Constantine, Armitage, or another, someone knew this weakness and exploited it." Lestrade bristled. "Then who did it, Mr. Holmes? You found one blade too many, but I see no man yet to hang." Holmes smiled faintly. "Patience, Inspector. A trap must be set before it can spring. Tonight, Watson, we shall contrive such a trap. But first, one last inquiry." He addressed Purcell directly. "The day before the murder, a packet arrived. Did you notice aught unusual in its paper or scent?" Purcell frowned. "Now that you mention it, sir, the wrapping smelled faintly of that same sweet perfume. I thought nothing of it." Holmes's eyes shone. "That is crucial. The powder, the scent, the smear on the sill, they all derive from the same source. Someone introduced it deliberately into the room, and the packet was their means." Armitage paled. "Do you mean Constantine?" "Perhaps. Or perhaps another who used Constantine's trade as his cloak. But the hand that guided the true blade is nearer than you think." Holmes cast one more glance at the broken case, the stopped clock, the bloodied rug. Then he said with quiet finality, "We have enough. Tonight we set the stage, and the player who thought himself unseen shall step into the light." The words lingered in that shadowed room, and even Lestrade's impatience yielded to a grim anticipation. I felt the air thicken with the promise of revelations, and I knew that the game, this deadly game of smoke, steel, and silver, was at last moving toward its decisive act. We returned to Baker Street in the early dusk, the fog folding itself about the lamps like gauze. Holmes sunk deep in thought, scarcely spoke during the journey, save once when he muttered to himself, "A powder, a cord, a counterfeit blade, and a fear that outlived reason. It is a curious tangle, Watson, but the strands are tightening." When we reached our sitting room, he paced the hearthrug with quick, restless strides, the violin tucked beneath his arm as if he might call on it for counsel at any moment. I could restrain myself no longer. "Holmes," I said, "you spoke of a trap to be set tonight. Surely you do not mean to hazard Lady Beauchamp and her household again?" He paused, his thin lips quirking. "On the contrary, Watson, to hazard them no longer. The assassin relies on shadows and illusions. We shall remove both. But first let us reconstruct what we know. Sir Roderick is found with a wound that no silver dagger could have made. A steel blade, concealed in haste, proves the true instrument. A cord drawn through the window accounts for the silver weapon's theatrical appearance. Powdered incense adulterated with mica links the sill, the wine-glass, and the packet delivered that very day. What is the inference? That someone, Constantine perhaps, sent this powder as a means of entry or concealment, I ventured. Good, Watson. Now extend the chain. Who knew that Sir Roderick's habit was to sit alone with his port at that hour? Who had access to the house, sufficient to contrive the fastening of the window afterwards? Who also had knowledge of the dagger's peculiar hold upon Sir Roderick's mind, enough to make it the centerpiece of this ghastly drama? I hesitated. The nephew spoke freely of that fear. "Just so," Holmes said, his eyes alight. "But we are not yet ready to close the noose. Suspicion is not proof. Proof must be courted, coaxed into the open. Tonight, Watson, we shall oblige our culprit to act again. The trick he played once he will attempt a second time, if only to reassure himself that no trace remains. I shall be waiting." He threw himself into a chair, fingers steepled, and for an hour he sat without motion, his gaze fixed on the fire as though reading there the movements of unseen players. At last he rose, donned his cloak and cap, and bade me do the same. "We shall dine at Simpson's," he said lightly, "and afterwards make for Hanover Square. A long night lies before us." The Beauchamp house was dim and hushed when we arrived. Lady Eugenia received us with the dignity of one who had steeled herself to every misfortune. "You are welcome, Mr. Holmes," she said, though her tone bore the weariness of sorrow. "The servants are confined to their quarters as you directed. Dean alone attends in the hall." "Excellent," Holmes replied. "You need not remain, madam. I would not have you exposed to further distress. Only grant us leave to command the library as we please." She inclined her head. "Take what measures you will. If justice may be served, Roderick will not have died in vain." Holmes bowed deeply, and we proceeded to the scene of the crime. The room had not changed, save that the air hung heavier still with that strange sweet taint, as though the very walls had absorbed it. Holmes inspected the window once more, ensuring that the latch was set but not fully engaged. He placed a length of fine black thread across the sill, so cunningly that it could scarcely be seen. "An old trick, Watson," he explained softly. "If anyone meddles with this sash, the thread will break. Then we shall know." We extinguished the lamps, leaving only the embers on the grate to glow faintly. Holmes bade me take station behind the curtains, while he himself crouched near the desk as still as a statue. The minutes dragged into hours, broken only by the occasional distant roll of a cab through the muffled fog. My limbs grew stiff, my eyelids heavy. Yet Holmes, I observed, never once shifted from his place, his eyes gleaming like those of a cat in the dark. It must have been near 2 o'clock when a sound at last broke the silence, the faint creak of a stair, cautious, deliberate. My heart quickened. A figure moved in the passage and paused at the door. There came the softest scrape of a key in the lock. Slowly the door opened, and a shadow slipped within. Even in the dimness I recognized the tall outline of Julian Armitage. He crossed the rug with the silence of one well practiced in stealth. His hand moved to the window latch. There was the faintest snap. The thread had parted. Holmes's eyes gleamed. The young man drew something from beneath his coat, a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. From it he scattered a dusting of dark powder upon the sill. then reached within his coat once more and produced. My breath caught. The very steel blade Holmes had found behind the bookcase. He bent to wipe it carefully with a cloth, as though removing the last betraying stain, then made as if to thrust it again into concealment. In that instant Holmes sprang forward. "That will suffice, Mr. Armitage," he cried and struck a match. The flare revealed Armitage's face, ghastly white, his eyes wild with shock. For one moment he stood frozen, then he made a dash for the door. But Holmes, with the swiftness of a striking hawk, caught him by the arm and twisted it so that the blade clattered harmlessly to the floor. I rushed from my hiding place, and between us we secured him. Armitage's composure collapsed. He sank into a chair, trembling violently. "You don't understand," he stammered. I had no choice. He drove me to ruin, debts, endless debts. The dagger, the collection, the inheritance, it was all that stood between me and disgrace. He would not help me. He despised me. Holmes regarded him with cold precision. "And so you contrived to murder him, to cloak your deed with a silver toy, to set a stage fit for a sensation. You sent yourself the parcel from Constantine's shop, laced with perfumed powder, to provide the scent and dust. You entered when the house was quiet, thrust the steel blade home, then drew the silver dagger by cord through the window to confuse the evidence. But the cord left its scratch, the powder its sparkle, the wound its truth. Crime, Mr. Armitage, leaves its signature in ink invisible to all but the trained eye." Armitage buried his face in his hands. "It was too late," he whispered. "I thought no one would know." Lestrade, whom Holmes had summoned earlier to wait discreetly in the hall, now entered with 2 constables. He wasted no time in clapping irons upon the young man. "Well, Mr. Holmes," he said with grudging respect, "I'll admit it. You've done it again. I'd have sworn on my badge the silver dagger was the weapon, but you've shown us different. The Yard owes you thanks." Holmes merely inclined his head, his gaze already distant, as though the puzzle solved had lost all savour for him. "Take him, Inspector. He is yours now. For myself, I have no taste for triumph over the weak. Watson, I fancy a pipe and perhaps a chapter of Goethe before bed. The case is concluded." Yet as we rode home through the lifting fog, I could not forget the sight of that trembling youth, undone by greed and desperation, nor the brilliance with which Holmes had drawn each thread into its place. Once again, he had illuminated the darkness with the keen flame of reason, and once again I marveled at the mind which could untangle what to all others was only chaos. The following morning found Holmes in an unusually reflective humour. He had risen before me, and when I entered our sitting-room he was already at the window, gazing out upon Baker Street where the autumn sun fought against lingering banks of fog. His violin lay across the chair as though abandoned mid-thought, and a thin wreath of smoke curled from the pipe upon the mantel. "You are restless, Holmes," I observed. "The case is solved, is it not? Young Armitage has confessed, the weapon has been secured, and Lestrade has all the evidence he requires. What remains?" Holmes turned, his sharp features drawn into that expression of ironic amusement which I had learned to regard as a sign that something further lay concealed. "Solved, Watson?" "Perhaps in the crude sense. A man is dead, his nephew confesses. Scotland Yard is satisfied, and the public will read of it over their breakfast kippers. Yet to my mind questions still hang in the air like smoke after a poorly doused fire. You astonish me. What more could there be? Did you not hear Armitage's own words? I had no choice. No choice, Watson, is the cry of desperation, not of cold calculation. Yet the staging of the crime, the silver dagger, the incense powder, the locked-room illusion, speaks of elaborate contrivance. Can we believe that a youth so careless in character, so unsteady of nerve, could fashion such a tableau without assistance? I confess his reasoning unsettled me. You suspect an accomplice? Not merely suspect. I am convinced. Armitage's hands held the blade, but another mind arranged the play. The lad would never have conceived of dragging a dagger by cord through a window, nor of smearing incense dust upon a glass. Those are devices borrowed from subtler experience. Constantine, I said at once. Holmes's eyes glimmered. The name presents itself, does it not? A dealer in curiosities, skilled in deception, acquainted with powders and pastilles and already quarrelling with the victim. Armitage supplied the motive, Constantine the method. But we require proof. Without it, Lestrade will be content with his prisoner, and the Yard will close the books. At that moment, Mrs. Hudson entered with a note. Holmes tore it open, scanned it, and handed it to me without a word. The handwriting was elegant, the wording brief. Mr. Holmes, I request the honour of an interview at your earliest convenience regarding the matter of Sir Roderick Beauchamp. Yours, Constantine? Remarkable, Holmes murmured. The spider knocks at the web of his own accord. Watson, we shall receive him at once. Within the hour, Constantine was shown up. He was immaculately dressed, his manner composed, though his eyes betrayed a feverish brightness. He bowed deeply as though to a court of justice. Mr. Holmes, he began, I have come because I fear for my reputation. Your inquiries may cast suspicion upon me, yet I am innocent. That young fool Armitage has brought disgrace enough. I admit I quarrelled with Sir Roderick, but I had no hand in his death. I am a man of business, not of violence. Holmes regarded him with the coolness of a surgeon about to probe a wound. Indeed, sir. Yet your business is deception. Forged coins, false antiques. Those are but refined forms of violence against truth. Tell me, what knowledge have you of incense powders mixed with mica and charcoal? Constantine started, but quickly composed himself. A common article in Eastern markets. Many collectors prize such trifles. And you sent such a powder yesterday to Sir Roderick? I did not, he exclaimed too hastily. I swear I did not. Holmes's voice grew softer, almost indulgent, yet the parcel bore your mark. The wrappings carried the same scent as the room where Sir Roderick died. Armitage may have wielded the steel, but who supplied the powder, the cord, the stratagem of the dagger? These are not the inventions of a desperate youth. They are the handiwork of a merchant well versed in trickery. Constantine's face hardened. You accuse me, but you cannot prove it. Holmes rose suddenly, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the carpet. On the contrary, I can and shall. When you delivered your packet, you dusted it with that same incense. Some adhered to the twine. I have that twine here. He drew from his desk a sealed envelope. Under the lens, the particles match precisely the smear upon the sill. Your hand, sir, is upon both. For the first time, Constantine's composure faltered. He grasped the back of the chair, his knuckles whitening. It was only a jest, he muttered. A trick to discredit Sir Roderick. He had ruined me with his accusations, so I sought to frighten him. I told the nephew how it might be done, with powder, with cord, with a theatrical display. I never thought the boy would drive steel into his heart. Yet he did, Holmes said sternly, and your jest became murder. The stage you contrived was bloodied, and both of you share its guilt. Constantine sank into the chair, his shoulders sagging, his rings flashing as his hands trembled. Holmes rang the bell, and when Lestrade was summoned, he presented the dealer with a curt explanation. Young Armitage has confessed to the act. Here is the man who conceived it. Charge them together, Inspector. Between them, they wove this web of silver and smoke. Lestrade, though clearly surprised, wasted no time in securing his man. As the two were led away, Holmes turned to me with a rare softness in his gaze. You see, Watson, how greed and cunning may join hands. The one provided motive, the other means. Alone, neither would have succeeded. Together, they fashioned an illusion nearly perfect, save that truth, like light, will pierce even the densest fog. That evening, as we sat once more by our fire, I could not resist a final question. Holmes, had Constantine not confessed, could you have proved his part? Holmes smiled faintly, the smoke of his pipe curling upward. My dear Watson, confession is but the adornment of proof. The powder upon the twine, the residue upon the glass, the parcel with its scent all pointed to him. His denial only confirmed what the facts had already written. But I confess, he added with a glance toward the violin. "There is a certain melancholy in such victories. The human heart, when warped by greed or folly, is capable of devices as intricate as any mechanical contrivance. It is a pity such ingenuity is squandered upon crime." I left him then to his meditations, the strains of his bow rising softly behind me as I wrote my notes. Thus ended the affair of the enigma of the Silver Dagger, though in truth it was less a tale of silver than of steel, less of dagger than of desperation. Yet in the quiet of that night I could not help but marvel again at the strange faculty of my friend, who could trace the faintest spark through darkness and bring the hidden culprit to light. For some days after Constantine's arrest, the case seemed to drift toward its inevitable legal conclusion. The papers had seized upon the tale with unbridled relish. The Silver Dagger mystery, they called it, and column after column speculated upon the morbid fascination of a murder staged with such grotesque artifice. Lestrade, flushed with the sudden warmth of public approval, called upon us once or twice to speak with uncharacteristic geniality of the matter. Young Armitage, he said, had been broken into frankness under examination, while Constantine remained sullen, denying all but the most obvious of facts. Scotland Yard was content, and already the prosecutors sharpened their pens for trial, yet Holmes was not content. He wore that look I had come to know so well, a narrowing of the eyes, a restlessness in his fingers, as though some string within the instrument of his mind had not yet resolved to harmony. For all Lestrade's confidence, Holmes kept pacing our rooms as if the whole riddle remained unsolved. One evening I found him thus, prowling from window to fireplace, his cigarette burned to ash. "Holmes," I said, "surely there is nothing more to discover. You traced the powder to Constantine, caught Armitage red-handed, and the law has them both secure." He turned sharply. "Watson, do you not perceive the dissonance? The wound itself remains anomalous. Recall the bruising at its lips. Steel pierced the heart, yes, but not in the straightforward thrust of a youth in panic. It was delivered with precision from an angle most inconvenient if Armitage struck face to face. Consider the geometry. Sir Roderick seated, the wound low and leftward, driven upward into the ventricle. A clumsy blow from the front would scarcely have taken such a line. It is the hand of one who knows anatomy, or at the very least has observed it. His words unsettled me, for as a surgeon I knew them to be true. You suggest, then, that Armitage did not deliver the fatal thrust?" Holmes's smile was thin. "I suggest that he believes he did, or wishes us to believe it." His confession was strangely colored, an outpouring of remorse, yet lacking in detail where detail mattered most. "I fear we have been too willing to accept a neat conclusion. Crime, alas, is seldom so obliging." I pressed him for more, but he merely shook his head, took up the violin and played a series of strange, jagged chords that set my nerves on edge. He did not speak again of the matter until the following morning, when the arrival of Lady Beauchamp herself forced the case back into the light. She entered our sitting-room with the same austere dignity as before, though grief had hollowed her features further. "Mr. Holmes," she said, "I must know the truth. They tell me Julian is to stand trial. He is a foolish boy, but I cannot reconcile his nature with the monstrous cunning of that night. He loved Roderick after his own weak fashion. Could he truly have devised such horror?" Holmes bowed. "Madam, I share your doubts. Your nephew's hand was guided, if not supplanted, by another. Tell me, who stood most to benefit by Sir Roderick's death?" She looked startled. "Why, Julian inherits the estate. Who else, unless you speak of myself? But I need no inheritance. My portion is secure. Roderick and I were bound by habit, not fortune." Holmes studied her keenly, but his tone remained courteous. "And the servants?" "Purcell, Dean, had they grievances?" "None that I know. Purcell was with us these 20 years, loyal beyond question. Dean is a boy scarcely out of training." Holmes steepled his fingers. "And yet the crime required knowledge of the library's habits, the dagger's significance, the household's routine. Someone within these walls must have supplied such knowledge. Constantine provided the tricks, yes, but whose hand wielded the steel with such precision? Lady Beauchamp's composure faltered. She drew herself upright, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something, fear or memory. "You frighten me, Mr. Holmes. If Julian is not guilty, then suspicion falls where I dare not follow." Holmes inclined his head. "Courage, madam. Truth alone can guard the innocent. I beg you to reflect carefully. Did Sir Roderick confide to anyone his fears of the dagger? Did he hint that another threatened him?" She hesitated, then spoke slowly. "He did mention once only that the dagger bore a curse. He laughed when I pressed him, but his manner was uneasy. He said that long ago a man had sworn to recover it, no matter the cost. I thought it a traveller's tale, but he kept the weapon locked as though he believed it." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And who told him this tale?" "A letter, years past, from some antiquarian acquaintance in Cairo. The name I forget." He rose abruptly. "Watson, the threads shift again. Constantine may be but the visible mask. There is an older, deeper claim upon this weapon, one that frightened Sir Roderick into secrecy. We must not rest upon half-truths. Lady Beauchamp, I entreat you to permit me one more search of the library, in particular your late husband's papers." She agreed with a weary nod, and it was arranged that we should call again that evening. When she departed, I turned to Holmes in astonishment. "Do you mean to suggest that some foreign hand lies behind this, beyond Constantine and Armitage?" Holmes struck the mantel with sudden vehemence. "Exactly. The powder, the scent, the Eastern trappings, these are not mere stage properties for Constantine's petty deceptions. They are emblems of a larger design. Armitage was but a pawn, Constantine a tool. But behind them stands a mind of singular persistence, one who coveted that dagger not as a bauble, but as a relic of meaning. Find him and we find the truth." That night at Hanover Square, Holmes and I returned once more to the chamber of death. The bloodstain still darkened the rug, though the body had been removed. Holmes went straight to the desk, searching swiftly through the drawers. At last he drew out a sheaf of correspondence, tied with string. Among the letters he selected one, yellowed with age, the ink faded but legible. He laid it before me. It was dated from Cairo, nearly 10 years past, signed by one Karim el-Masri. The writer spoke of a silver dagger, sacred to a brotherhood long dissolved, stolen generations before, and believed cursed. He warned Sir Roderick that possession of it would bring danger, for a sworn heir of the brotherhood lives yet, who will reclaim it in blood. I looked up, startled. Holmes's face was grave. "You see, Watson, the pattern extends beyond London's fog. A vendetta, born in the East, has reached across years and seas. Sir Roderick's death was no mere quarrel of nephew and dealer. It was the fulfillment of a vow." Even as he spoke, footsteps sounded in the hall. Purcell entered bearing a tray of wine, but Holmes's gaze fixed upon him with sudden intensity. For the first time I observed a tremor in the butler's hand as he set down the decanter. Holmes's voice rang like steel. "Stay, Purcell. There is more of your service to render. I believe you know this letter's author?" The man froze, colour draining from his face. In that moment, I knew Holmes had pierced to the heart of the matter, and that the most trusted figure in the household was bound in some dark way to the curse of the Silver Dagger. Purcell stood as if struck, his usually impassive features betraying a sudden slackness. The tray trembled in his hands and the decanter rattled against the glasses. Holmes moved a step nearer, his eyes never leaving the butler's face. "You recognize the hand, Purcell," Holmes said quietly, tapping the faded letter upon the desk. "This Karim el-Masri was no stranger to you. More than that, you knew his cause, his oath, and his claim upon the dagger." The man's lips parted, but no words came. He placed the tray upon the table with deliberate care, as though seeking refuge in ceremony. Then, in a low voice, he said, "I have served this house faithfully for 20 years. Holmes's reply was swift, his tone cutting. "Faithfully, yet not without divided allegiance. Your loyalty has been to two masters, to the Beauchamps and to a vow older than your service here, which held sway on the night Sir Roderick died. Purcell's eyes flickered toward Lady Beauchamp, who sat rigid in her chair, her gaze fixed upon him in horrified fascination. "I did not strike him," Purcell whispered. "By the saints, I did not. But I knew it must come. The dagger was never his. He was warned." He laughed. "Then you did more than stand by," Holmes pressed. "You aided those who came to claim it. The powder upon the sill, the knowledge of the house's habits, the very concealment of the true blade all point to a guiding hand within the walls. Armitage supplied his weakness, Constantine his trickery, but you, Purcell, were the silent architect who allowed the storm to break." At this, the butler's composure shattered. He sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands. "It was not murder, Mr. Holmes. It was justice. The dagger was sacred, a relic desecrated. Karim was my kinsman. When I was a boy in Cairo, I swore to him that if ever the relic crossed my path, I would see it returned. When Sir Roderick flaunted it, boasting of his right to own what was not his, I could not forget that oath." Lady Beauchamp gave a faint cry. "You, Purcell, you whom we trusted beyond all others." Purcell lifted his head, his eyes bright with desperate fervor. "I served you loyally in all else, madam, but in this blood bound me stronger than service. I did not thrust the blade. That was Armitage's hand, though guided by Constantine's counsel. I only unlatched the window, scattered the powder, made smooth the path. It was to frighten Sir Roderick, to force him to yield the dagger, not to kill him. But once blood was shed, the vow was fulfilled, and there was no return." Holmes regarded him coldly. "A convenient division of guilt. Yet the law will scarcely be persuaded. You knew your part would lead to violence. You cannot wash your hands of the consequence." The room had grown still but for the faint ticking of the mantel clock. At length Holmes said, "Where is the dagger now?" Purcell hesitated, then drew from his coat a narrow bundle wrapped in cloth. He laid it upon the desk with reverence. Holmes unwrapped it to reveal the silver weapon, its blade faintly tarnished, its lion-headed pommel glinting in the lamplight. "So," Holmes murmured, "it is restored to its place. But tell me, Purcell, why was it bloodied if not by the fatal wound?" Purcell's voice steadied. "Because it was pressed against the wound after the act, to mark it, to claim it. Constantine advised it. He said it would confuse, that no one would know steel from silver. It was meant as a sign." Holmes turned the weapon in his hands, his expression unreadable. "A sign indeed of misplaced faith. You bound yourself to a brotherhood long dead, and in its name you betrayed the house you served." At that moment Lestrade entered, summoned earlier by Holmes's discreet note. He listened grimly as Holmes repeated the confession, then signaled to his men. Purcell rose without resistance, his dignity strangely intact even in disgrace. "I have done what honor demanded," he said quietly as they led him away. "Let the law say what it will." When the door closed behind them, Lady Beauchamp sank back, her strength spent. "Mr. Holmes," she whispered, "is there no end to the treachery? First my husband slain, then my nephew disgraced, Constantine unmasked, and now Purcell, my most trusted servant, proved false. What remains to me?" Holmes's expression softened, though his voice remained measured. "Madam, what remains is the truth, however bitter. Falsehood, once stripped away, leaves only what is. In that lies the possibility of peace. Your husband was not struck down by random cruelty, nor by some curse, but by human weakness, greed, desperation, and misguided loyalty. It is poor comfort, but it is certainty." She inclined her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "You have given me that at least. For it I thank you. As we departed into the night air, I could not shake the heaviness that hung upon me. The fog curled thick about the lamps, and the stones gleamed with dampness." Holmes walked in silence, his hands thrust deep in his coat, his head bent. At last I spoke. "So you were right, Holmes. Armitage was but a pawn, Constantine a tool, and Purcell the hand within the house. But what of this Karim el-Masri? Does his shadow not still linger?" Holmes gave a short, mirthless laugh. "The Brotherhood is dust, Watson. Karim is old, perhaps long dead. His letter was the spark, but Purcell carried the flame. What remains is for the law to settle. Yet I confess," he paused, his gaze lifting toward the murky sky, "there is a melancholy in such cases. Men bind themselves to oaths, to greed, to illusions, and in so doing destroy what they profess to serve. Sir Roderick loved his relics, Armitage his pleasures, Constantine his schemes, Purcell his vow. Each became enslaved, and slavery of that sort ends only in ruin." We reached Baker Street at last, and Holmes, casting off his cloak, went straight to the mantel and lit his pipe. The blue smoke curled upward as he sank into his chair. His voice came low, almost weary. "We have followed this enigma from Mayfair drawing-rooms to Cairo's forgotten vows. It is finished, Watson. The dagger has claimed its last victim. Let us turn the page." Yet as I wrote my notes by the fire that night, I could not help but feel that the shadow of the silver dagger lingered still, a symbol of how easily men, whether through weakness or devotion, may twist themselves into instruments of tragedy. The following days brought a strange lull. Scotland Yard, flushed with its string of arrests, was content to close the matter. The press trumpeted the tale of a crime born of avarice, cunning, and divided loyalties, and London, always eager for sensation, devoured it with appetite. Yet Holmes remained unsatisfied. He spoke little, but I saw in his eyes that distant gleam which told me his thoughts still pursued some elusive quarry. One evening, as I was penning my medical notes, he turned suddenly from the fire. "Watson, there is a discordant note yet unresolved. Have you considered why Purcell, so devoted to his oath, handed me the dagger without struggle?" I recalled the butler's solemn surrender. He seemed resigned, almost relieved. Perhaps he believed his duty accomplished once the relic was stained with Sir Roderick's blood. Holmes shook his head. "Resignation is not relief. Mark this. He claimed the dagger was pressed against the wound only after the act to serve as a sign. But why then was the blood upon it so dark, so ingrained, as though long congealed before discovery? I examined it under my lens, Watson. That stain was not fresh. The implication startled me. You mean the dagger had been bloodied before it ever touched Sir Roderick's body?" "Precisely. Which raises the question, whose blood and why? The relic was made to appear the weapon of the crime, but the stain upon it was older than that night. Someone prepared it in advance, intending from the start to weave it into the illusion. Purcell may have believed he served an oath, but I suspect he too was deceived. There is another hand at work still unaccounted for." I was about to press him further when Mrs. Hudson entered with a telegram. Holmes tore it open and his brows rose. "Ah! Listen to this, Watson. From Alexandria. Karim el-Masri dead these 5 years. Letter genuine, but vow now claimed by another. Beware emissary in London. Signed, Mahmoud Ali, Consulate." Holmes let the slip fall into the fire. "So Karim is gone, but the Brotherhood spectre yet moves. Purcell was its tool, Constantine its dupe, Armitage its scapegoat. But the true heir, the emissary, remains at large. The revelation chilled me. Then Sir Roderick's murder was not merely the fruit of family greed. Family greed was the soil in which the seed flourished, but the hand that sowed it belonged to another. And until we find that hand, the case is unfinished." That very night, Holmes resolved to revisit Hanover Square once more. Lady Beauchamp received us with a wan dignity, though I sensed the weight of scandal bore heavily upon her. Holmes requested permission to search Sir Roderick's private safe, a small iron cabinet in the library wall. With some reluctance, she provided the key. Inside lay papers, coin collections, and several small caskets of jewels. Holmes examined them swiftly, setting aside each with disinterest, until he drew forth a narrow parchment roll sealed with wax. He broke it open, and we bent together to read. It was an inventory, but not of curios. It listed transactions, sums of money, dates, and names, many of them foreign. At the end was scrawled a note in Sir Roderick's hand. "Payment to El-Masri's heir. Last installment refused. Demands grow intolerable. Will endure no more. Holmes's eyes gleamed. There, Watson, lies the motive. Sir Roderick had been blackmailed for years. He bought the dagger abroad, no doubt knowing something of its sinister reputation. Helmasri or his kin seized upon it, threatening him with vengeance unless he paid. For a time he complied, but at last he refused. Then came the emissary, and with him death. Lady Beauchamp, pale, pressed a hand to her lips. You mean Roderick's fear was not of thieves or curses, but of this blackmailer? Exactly. His paranoia, his restless checks upon the dagger, were the signs of a man hounded by demands. He trusted no one, yet even in distrust he was ensnared. As we spoke, Dean the footman entered quietly with a letter just delivered by hand. Lady Beauchamp broke the seal, then gave a cry. She thrust the sheet toward Holmes. It read, "The silver dagger is ours by right. Return it, or more blood will follow." The heir, Holmes's face hardened. So the true hand reveals itself at last, though still veiled. Watson, this letter is fresh, the ink scarce dry. The emissary is here, watching and emboldened. I confess I felt a shiver, as though unseen eyes already glared from the fog outside. Holmes, however, seemed invigorated by the challenge. We must bait our adversary, Watson. If he demands the dagger, we shall grant him the illusion of possession, and in so doing draw him into the light. The relic shall be placed here once more, displayed as though unguarded. But we shall watch. Lady Beauchamp recoiled. You would risk another murder beneath my roof? Not risk, madam, prevent, Holmes said with quiet certainty. Better to confront the shadow now than to live in perpetual dread. I promise you no harm shall befall your house again. It was arranged that the following night the dagger, sealed by Holmes in glass, would be set upon its stand in the broken case. The library would be left in darkness, save for a single lamp. Holmes, Lestrade, and I would remain hidden within, while constables surrounded the grounds. That evening, as the house sank into silence, we took our stations. I crouched behind the curtains once more, revolver in hand. Holmes concealed himself near the hearth, his lean form barely discernible in the shadows. Hours passed with only the crackle of the fire and the distant strike of clocks. My nerves strained at every sound, but Holmes remained perfectly composed, as though carved from the darkness itself. At last, near the hour of 2, a faint scrape came from the window. The latch stirred. A shadow moved upon the sill, then slid into the room with uncanny silence. The figure was tall, wrapped in a cloak, the features concealed by a scarf and low-brimmed hat. He moved straight to the case, his gloved hand reaching toward the dagger. Holmes sprang forward with the suddenness of a thunderclap. "Now, Watson," he cried. I leapt out, revolver leveled. The intruder wheeled, a knife flashing in his hand. But Lestrade and 2 constables burst from the door, and in an instant the room was filled with struggle. The man fought like a cornered beast, striking wildly, but Holmes's wiry strength closed upon him. The knife clattered to the floor, and the scarf was torn away. By the lamplight I saw a face neither foreign nor wholly strange. It was Constantine's clerk, a young Levantine fellow I recalled glimpsing in the arcade. His eyes blazed with fury. "The dagger is ours," he spat. "You English have no right. I would kill 100 to reclaim it." Holmes held him firmly, his voice calm amid the tumult. "You will kill no more. Your master El-Masri is dead, and with him the oath. You are but a scavenger of shadows. The law shall deal with you." The constables dragged him away, still shouting oaths in his tongue. Holmes replaced the dagger in its case, then turned to me with a weary smile. "So ends the true enigma, Watson. Not in silver nor in smoke, but in blood and folly. The dagger has claimed its last, and London may sleep untroubled once more." And yet as we left Hanover Square, the fog curling about us, I could not rid my mind of that young fanatic's cry. To Holmes it was but the final note of a case resolved, but to me it lingered as a reminder that some relics carry not merely history but the passions of men. and that those passions may outlive reason itself. The captured intruder had scarcely been conveyed away before silence fell again upon the library, broken only by the faint hiss of the extinguished struggle. Holmes dusted his hands, his expression one of grim satisfaction. Lestrade, flushed and exultant, was quick to declare the matter concluded. "There you are, Mr. Holmes." The last of them caught red-handed. "The yard shall tidy the rest." Holmes regarded him with a faint smile. "You are content, Inspector, when the net has landed 3 small fish. But I tell you, there was a hand that cast them in the stream. This youth was but the visible emissary. Still, his capture will serve to break the chain. The Brotherhood, if it ever lived, is now scattered remnants. I believe the matter may rest." Lady Beauchamp entered at that moment, drawn by the commotion. She looked from Holmes to the shattered case, then to the dagger gleaming coldly beneath the lamplight. "Take it away, Mr. Holmes," she said with sudden passion. "I will not have that thing within these walls another hour. It has poisoned our house, destroyed my husband, ruined my nephew, corrupted my servant. Whatever its worth, it is cursed indeed." Holmes inclined his head gravely. "You speak wisely, madam. Relics such as this are but tinder to the flames of greed and fanaticism. If you entrust it to me, I shall see it placed beyond the reach of those who would kill to possess it." She handed it to him without hesitation, as one might rid oneself of a venomous snake. Holmes wrapped the weapon carefully and placed it within his case. With that gesture the chapter seemed at last to close. We left Hanover Square in the dim hours before dawn, the fog thinning into the first pale streaks of day. Holmes was uncharacteristically silent on our drive back to Baker Street. His eyes were half shut, yet I could see in the tightening of his lips that his mind still moved among the echoes of the affair. At length he spoke, more to himself than to me. "Strange, Watson, how men weave their own doom. Sir Roderick coveted a relic for its rarity, Constantine for its profit, Armitage for its inheritance, Purcell for an oath, this clerk for a phantom cause. Each thought himself master, yet each became slave. The dagger had no power save what they lent it, yet it has left death and ruin in its wake." I murmured agreement, though my thoughts lingered upon Lady Beauchamp, who must bear the wreckage of her house. Holmes continued, his tone softening. "We too are not immune, Watson. Passion for truth, for reason, for the chase, these are fine chains, yet chains nonetheless. Let us be wary that they bind us not too tightly." Back at Baker Street, Holmes placed the wrapped dagger upon the mantel. He regarded it for a long moment, before drawing the cloth away. The silver blade glimmered in the firelight, its lion-headed pommel fierce, its edge dull and battered. He studied it with the cool detachment of a naturalist examining a specimen. Then, with sudden resolve, he wrapped it again. "I shall send this to the British Museum in the morning," he said. "Better it should sleep in a case stripped of mystery than prowl in the imagination of fools. There it will harm no one." I confess a sense of relief at his decision. Too much blood had been spilt for me to endure the sight of that weapon upon our hearth. I retired at last. Yet even in sleep I dreamed of silver blades and shadowy figures pressing against shuttered windows. The next day brought fresh evidence of Holmes's foresight. A report reached us that Constantine, though imprisoned, had attempted to send word to associates abroad. The intercepted message, written in cipher, hinted at others who would claim the relic. Yet with the dagger already removed from circulation, the message carried no weight. "The chain is broken," Holmes said simply, tossing the decoded sheet into the fire. Armitage, for his part, languished in custody, his confession now complicated by the revelations of Purcell and the clerk. The courts would decide how blame was to be divided. But Holmes remarked to me, "The lad is weak rather than wicked. He yielded to pressure, not to appetite for murder. I would not be surprised if mercy tempers his judgment. As for Purcell, his dignity never wavered, though his admissions sealed his fate." Lady Beauchamp, with quiet firmness, arranged that he be defended by counsel, declaring, "I cannot forget his years of service, though I abhor the deed. Holmes, Hearing this, observed with some approval, "Charity is rare, Watson. It is the one antidote to the poisons we have seen." Weeks later, when the trial concluded and the affair at last faded from the papers, Holmes and I sat once more before our fire, the long nights of winter upon us. The city outside moved on to fresh scandals, fresh amusements. Yet I felt compelled to return in my notes to the strange concatenation of motives that had converged upon a single object. "Holmes," I said, "do you ever reflect that, without your intervention, the truth would have remained forever tangled? The Yard was content with the Silver Dagger as the weapon and Armitage as the sole culprit. But you saw through the illusion." Holmes leaned back, the ghost of a smile upon his lips. "My dear Watson, truth is always there, plain as the sun, if one strips away the veils men place upon it. But you are wrong in one thing. I did not solve this case. The case solved itself, as all puzzles do, once the right questions are asked. I but held the lens." He reached for his violin, and the first plaintive notes filled the room, mingling with the crackle of the fire. I sat watching him, as I had so many times, marveling anew at the strange mind of my friend. For in this case, more than any I recalled, Holmes had not merely unmasked a murderer, but revealed how human folly, greed, and misdirected loyalty could twist themselves into tragedy. Thus ended the affair of the Enigma of the Silver Dagger. It left behind no triumph, no glory, but rather a sombre lesson, that objects of desire, however inert in themselves, may become the lodestones of men's ruin when pride and passion fix upon them. And as I laid down my pen that night, I reflected that the true mystery was not in the dagger, but in the human heart. The weeks that followed saw the city's appetite for sensation turn elsewhere. Yet the case of the Silver Dagger lingered with us, a shadow upon Baker Street. Armitage, spared the gallows through Holmes's testimony, was sentenced to a long exile of labor rather than death. Constantine's trade was dismantled, his reputation broken beyond repair. Purcell met his judgment with the calm of one who believes his duty fulfilled, though the law named it treachery. The nameless clerk, whose fanaticism had driven him to violence, was swiftly consigned to prison, his cries of vengeance echoing briefly in the newspapers before fading into silence. Lady Beauchamp withdrew from society, her dignity unshaken, though her household was left in ruins. Holmes had sent the dagger to the British Museum, where it was catalogued and locked behind glass, its luster robbed of mystery, reduced to a mere curiosity among 1,000 other relics of the East. There it lay inert, stripped of its power to ensnare the weak or the ambitious. One evening, as the last embers glowed upon our hearth, I turned to Holmes and said, "You were right, my friend. The dagger had no curse but the one men brought to it. Each sought it for greed, vengeance, or vanity, and each paid the price." Holmes's eyes glimmered in the lamplight, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Precisely, Watson. Objects are but mirrors. They reflect the passions of those who covet them. The dagger was neither good nor evil. It was men who wove around it a web of illusion. Had Sir Roderick never flaunted it, had Constantine not schemed with it, had Purcell not bound himself to an oath, it would have remained a piece of silver, no more dangerous than a candlestick. I was silent for a moment, watching the smoke curl upward. "And yet," I said, "without you the truth would have remained forever buried. The Yard would have hanged one man and declared the matter settled." Holmes gave a short laugh, more weary than triumphant. "Truth, Watson, has a way of rising, if only one cares to look. But I confess this case leaves me less with satisfaction than with melancholy. I saw in it not brilliance to admire, but folly to lament. Men enslaved to greed, to oaths, to illusions. What music can one draw from such strings?" He reached for his violin and drew a long plaintive note that seemed to carry with it the sorrow of the house in Hanover Square, the wasted lives, the fruitless blood. Then he set the instrument aside, his eyes softening. "Still there is this. A wrong has been set right, a mystery unraveled, and the innocent shielded from blame. That, Watson, must suffice. I wrote my final notes that night with a strange heaviness, for though the case had ended in justice, it bore the air of tragedy rather than triumph. And yet, as ever, I marvelled at Holmes, at his tireless pursuit of reason, his unflinching gaze into the darkest corners of human motive, and the strange humility with which he accepted his victories. So it was that the enigma of the Silver Dagger passed into the annals of his career, not as the most perilous nor the most dazzling of our adventures, but as one of the most human. And as I laid down my pen, I could hear his voice still, quiet, detached, yet tinged with that peculiar philosophy which made him at once so brilliant and so solitary. The world, Watson, is full of silver daggers. It falls to us to see them for what they are.